It's another day, another venture. Thank you for tuning in into the Punchline Podcast. It's none other than Lawrence Seretse. It's always a great time and a great feeling every time I come and sit here and enjoy the moment, enjoy the conversations that we are about to have with our guest. Today in the Punchline Podcast, I'm joined by enemy of the state number one, a friend of mine, the good lawyer, Mr. Exile himself. Let me tell you a brief background about this individual. He is the only person to be banished from this country 3 times and then PI'd once by 2 administrations and 2 different presidents. It's a very unique and a special trait or a special attribution to have, which is why I'm curious for us to sit together today, have a chit chat and try to understand why this rebel with a cause has a great passion for our nation. I'm sure you already can get the glimpse. I'm joined by none other than human rights lawyer, Joao Carlos Salbany. Mr. Salbany, welcome to the Punchline Podcast.
Thanks, Lawrence, and what an introduction.
I like rebel with a cause because most of us know your noble actions in this country, but then again, it's like this country doesn't love you, yet you have stood up for so many of us in terms of where our human rights have been neglected. How are you feeling today?
Good. It's good to be back home.
Okay.
It's good to be here with you.
Okay.
Yeah, exciting times. You've got a government that speaks to my soul, and speaks to what I've always aspired to as a professional. So
yes.
It's a good time to be back.
Okay, that's great. For a long time now, I've been trying to have you on this feature interview. Actually, when I started here, one of the first people I really wanted to have, mainly because I know your story and I know the story of your life more. I mean, you my best friend, you've been my best man, and I do understand other things sometimes about you that I always feel like a lot of people really deserve to know the great things that this man has done for this nation. But sometimes because you are always refusing and running away and all sorts of things, and I'm like, but one day the opportunity will come. So when did you come into the country? Originally I came to Botswana in August of '93. My late father had moved here in 1990 to head the Faculty of Science department at UB. Okay.
So he had come from the University of Zimbabwe. He came here, and then I joined him 3 years later. You grew up in Zimbabwe, but your Portuguese decent. Yes.
How did you?
It's a long, complicated story. My story tends to be complicated.
Okay.
So my parents, my father was born in Portugal, my mother was born in Mozambique. When my father moved to South Africa to pursue his studies as a mathematician, my parents moved there. And then in 1979, they had to go into exile. They were involved in South African politics at the time. So we moved to Zimbabwe at independence. And so we grew up pretty much in Zimbabwe from, I was 10 years old until I left when I was 19. I stayed in South Africa for a short while and then came here.
When you came here, that was when he was getting a job at the University,
of Botswana,
like you mentioned. Yeah. So you came here, you went straight to Varsity University of Botswana, or you started at high school? You at Marula, right?
No. I went straight into university.
Okay, you went straight. I'm told you used to be that white boy with the long hair, always holding a cigarette.
Well, it was definitely longer than it is now. There was hair. And 3 earrings, and yes, the cigarette, and my law lecturers used to complain to my father that I was always sitting outside the library, chatting to attractive girls, according to them. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But
the naughty ones.
The naughty ones, yeah.
So how was your life like at university? Understand that's where you met quite a lot of your colleagues now in the legal fraternity, now some in the political places of power and all the likes. How was your university?
Well, I think I was lucky. Our group was lucky because many of the current leaders in Botswana, whether in the civil service or whether in the political sphere, were our contemporaries at university. My immediate contemporaries, there's many of them.
Like
but
who?
Botsalo Ntuane, Homolemo Motsoaledi, the current president, he was an SDF, he taught me jurisprudence. Dumelang Saleshandro, there's many, many of them. But my classmates, for example, one of them is the current director of public prosecutions, and various others are scattered in high positions within government. So I think it was just that time when, well, we've now all progressed in our careers, and now we are reaching the pinnacle of our careers. So it was an interesting time. There was a lot of change going on in Botswana. It was the first time, just after we started university, it was just after the 92 elections. Was it 92 or 94? 94, where the BNF had done particularly well for the first time. So there was clearly winds of change. I think those winds of change have carried over the better part of 30 years to what we have now. But I'll certainly say things started then. But, you know,
how did you decide to get into law or other things, maybe? I've always had an interest in law. You know, growing up in a very political family, we had lots of people come through the house in Zimbabwe and stay with us. But in particular, the one that leaves a lasting memory was Chris Hani. And he always used to say to me that you are a workers' person. You are a trade unionist. I think I must have been about 15 or 16 years old. Chris Hani?
Yes.
Okay.
He stayed at our house for a while.
Oh, in Zim?
In Zim, yeah. Our house in Zim was sort of like a gateway for
political exiles.
For political refugees. Ironically, maybe, given my own position. No, but my father was in South African Communist Party. My mother was ANC. My elder brother, but the second brother was in APLA, the military wing of the Pan-Africanist Congress. So yeah, the family was very political. And I think the issue of rights,
it was a big thing at the time. I mean, around apartheid,
exactly,
and, the Zimbabwean regime at the time.
And it really, you know, I don't think the youth these days feel the impact of the division that there was in society as much as the generation from the 70s and possibly the 80s felt it.
We could say we are better civilized now.
Well, not better civilized, but we were certainly more focused on a certain political ideology. So, you know, the issue of rights was hugely important. There was also the division between East and West in the world, which then collapsed in the 90s. But I think that also framed us and framed that generation. You see the likes of you know, talking about the contemporaries in Botswana. You see the likes of the Dick Bayfords, the Kidingakes, His Excellency Duma Boko. They were all left-wing orientated, and that was a lot because of what they went through as youth. There's a recent memoir that has come out on Justice Ningake, and he speaks about how the politics in Southern Africa shaped them.
Yes.
And then, you know, Lawrence, we can criticize in hindsight many of the leaders, but let me tell you, in 79 and 1980, Mugabe was a hero. He was somebody that we idolized. And, you know, I had the good fortune of meeting Mugabe. I had the good fortune of meeting Julius Nyerere. And I had the good fortune of meeting Kenneth Kaunda.
I've seen a picture at your house with some of those.
Yes. Yeah. You've seen me. I think the picture you're referring to is with myself with Mugabe.
Yeah.
But these were people that we looked up to. Some of them, it didn't go quite the way we would have liked the world to go. But the fact is that their liberation credentials were a phenomenal influence
at the time. Yes.
And especially to a young, impressionable person who looked at them and saw that, you know, the issue of rights, the issue of land redistribution.
And really just removing yourselves as a race or as a society from the shackles of oppression, which has been going for generations and all that kind of stuff. Yes. So yeah, your family was quite more political than if that is followed. So that's what influenced you then to jump into LLB. At the University of Botswana. How much? 4 years?
5 years.
5 years.
The degree is 5 years.
Yes.
And whilst we were at UB, I had the benefit of being taught by some of, I think, the greatest legal minds that Botswana has produced. There was Duma, of course. There was Kidingake, Talia Molokome, Professor Utlogile. And they were all left-leaning lecturers. We had some very conservative lecturers, but those ones in particular were left-leaning. And of course, they had their own influences, you know, their style of teaching and the manner in which they would impart knowledge resonated with me. H.E. always jokes that he passed me because he couldn't read my handwriting. He says he would get my scripts and put them at the bottom, and by that time he was tired and would be like, no, this guy talks a bit of sense in class, so...
So I'm curious. I thought you and President Boko were around the same age. How did you get to become your lecturer?
We only a few months apart.
55,
actually.
Yes, 55.
We only a few months apart, and it's been an ongoing joke between the two of us. When I left high school, so I left Mount Pleasant in 1988, 89. In Harare. I did my A-levels, and then I worked in Johannesburg for 3-4 years. And then I came to do my studies here. So I was one of the elders in the class. But
elders meaning
in terms of age,
the late bloomers.
Yeah, the late bloomers. We had some in the class that were very young because they had just finished their Tirelo Sechaba, and then they came straight to UB. But they were still, I think, 18 or so. And I was a good 5 years already older than them. So but we also had some that had come from the Botswana police force at the time and were doing law. And yeah, we're still friends today, but yeah, so there was a group of us that were slightly older. But when you're at university, it's inconsequential. 5 years doesn't really make much of a difference.
Of course. So then I'm trying to understand, okay, it is because of that reason that you are explaining how then you and your lecturer were of the same age, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Which means then phenomenally in his intelligence, he excelled quicker than the rest of the people, or he went to school at an earlier age, or you came...
I came late, but...
You came late.
But I think he excelled. And then, of course, so he finished in 93, which was the year we started. He became an SDF, and then that was when he went to Harvard. So we missed him for the remaining period. But fortunately, we had... Kidingake, who then was teaching us other classes, and Natalia Molokome was teaching us other things. So we had a good rights-based, human rights-based group of lecturers. Of course, Professor Otlogile at the time was, or maybe just before, but Professor Otlogile was an old BNF stalwart. Unfortunately, he sort of left politics in the early days, but I think his affiliations have always been well known.
Oh, okay, okay, of course. So then you graduate with your LLB. Where did you start your work? Was it at the time a lot of people, as a natural rite of passage, will go into government, but it seems like you went straight into private.
Well, again, I think fate intervened. Because my first employment was with Bayford and Associates.
Yes, yes.
In fact, I had been applying at a couple of places, and then one of my classmates, Moahi Ndlovu, who's at DPP, said, "Oh no, I'll take you to go see Ray Bayford," and of course the name Bayford was already a well-known name at the time.
Yes.
So I went to see Dick, and I sort of sat in his reception for, I think, the first 2 days, and his wife came out and kept saying that he would come, and I was determined I wasn't going to leave.
Yes.
And so I think eventually they got tired of this white boy sitting in the reception, and they put me in the library, and I was there paging through some books, and I hear a small baby sounds, and I look under the table, and there's this little basket. With my niece, well, now she's my niece because I've grown up with her. And that was Bayford's daughter, Natasha.
Yes.
And so I picked her up and I carried her to her mother. And I think that's probably the reason why they hired me. They thought, not only do we have a lawyer, but we've got a babysitter as well. So that started a wonderful relationship.
Okay.
And it's really a relationship that has molded my career. At the time, so this was in '98, At the time, the BNF was going through some internal rife.
Yes.
And Kenneth Khama used to come to the office all the time. And we got to talking quite a lot, and I liked the old man very much. He was going blind at the time, so he'd come to the office. He'd put his hands on my face. Ah, my boy. Kakwan. And we'll go into the library, and we would talk about Botswana's history, talk about the vision of the BNF at the time. And then Dick and I were involved in one of the litigations that ultimately created the BCP. And then there was the...
Which one is that?
When
the BNF was breaking?
It was breaking up, yeah.
Oh,
so we represented the BNF.
So that was before NDF?
That was before NDF,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
NDF was subsequently.
Yes.
Then there was the debacle in Palape, where there was a whole mess. I can't remember exactly what happened. But Lottie Manyapedza was working at the firm at the time.
Yes.
And he got in trouble in Palape, and I was the one who was shipped off to get him out of the police cells and stop his continued detention. So Lottie and I then developed a good relationship.
Yes, yes.
And Lottie was a very radical left wing at the time. I think at heart he still is. But yeah, so Bayford's my pupillage and induction into law with Dick really geared my path. I guess even with my childhood upbringing, but the two just complemented each other very well.
It was a natural path.
It was a natural path.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I understand that at some point then you worked with Collins Newman, then you established Salbany and Toto alongside Marvin, which then you subsequently left to go back to Bayford's again, and all that kind of stuff.
Your order's a little bit mixed up.
Yes.
But yeah, I was with Bayford. Then we set up Salbany and Toto.
Oh, okay.
Well, I was with Bayford, then Minchin and Kelly for 3 years. Then we set up Salbany and Toto. Then there was some issues in my life. One of those things, I decided to leave and go join Collins Newman. And I think some of these things have a way of working out. I did the Nchindu appeal. Louis Nchindu had instructed Bayford he had instructed his file to be moved from Collins Newman to Bayford. And before that happened, he had passed away. And so I then went when I was at Collins Newman, that was after the conviction of Nchindu's,
yes.
So I was asked then to do the appeal. And during my tenure at Collins Newman, basically my principal thing wasn't my sole obligation, but one of my principal issues was to deal with the appeal, which ultimately we succeeded on. And then...
You succeeded on, that was Collins Newman at the time was with Park Staffer, right?
Park Staffer.
And it was the biggest advisor to government.
To government, exactly.
And all the likes at the time. I had a guest about a week ago who was concluding this story that the case was technically buried by government. So you're the one who was doing that, I think.
No, and I have huge respect for that guest, because that guest subsequently became my boss.
Yes.
In another funny twist of fate.
Yes. Well, it's time one. I mean, it's out there.
It's time one, exactly.
So I reconcile these two extremes for me, because your version seems to contradict.
You see, the funny thing about the Nchindu case is that all parties involved from the various different sides like to attribute that the other side was involved in suppressing the case or promoting the case. I came along from a very different angle because I was only doing the appeal. So I think I could see things with greater clarity.
Yes.
I've heard the prosecutor's version of it. I've heard Rekatlolo's version of it. And I know what my former client's version or the former client's family's version of it is. And it's just one of those cases where I think everyone was trying to meddle one way or another. Whether if you listen to one side, they will say Remo Khai was meddling. If you listen to another side, they will say Khama was meddling. You will have accusations against Nkate. You will have even accusations against the presiding judge at the trial hearing. So I think it's one of those cases that was so much in the public domain that win or lose, there were going to be accusations thrown everywhere. I'm not saying that there wasn't sort of political interference one way or another, but the fact is it was a criminal trial like any other criminal trial. And I think that case then paved the way for me to ultimately join the DCEC, because that case brought me to the attention of Rema Tambo, which I found out in hindsight. And Rema Tambo was the person who hired me into the DCEC.
Oh, you have fast forwarded to 10 years?
10 years later.
Okay.
It wasn't quite 10 years. It was about 5 years. But what I'm saying is that my involvement in that case was what picked his... because I didn't know Rema Tambo.
Yes. He was coming from the BDF.
He was coming from the BDF.
So at that time, before we move there, I'm trying to understand that obviously you won that judgment. Maybe remind us what the ruling was, because then it is the one that also influenced that part of the land be returned back to the to your client.
So at the High Court, what is now Setloa, had been forfeited to the state. And all the accused had been convicted and sentenced to various amounts. What happened at the Court of Appeal was that all that was reversed and Setloa was returned to the family's company, which is why you have the developments there now.
What was your main argument that made you able to overturn such a case that was a marathon and involving characters who are larger than life, and then ultimately at the end of the day you successfully overturn a High Court judgment in a case like this? What was your...
Lawrence, that was, what, 12 years ago? 10 years ago?
More actually.
Yeah, you needed to prep me a bit better for this interview.
Yes, I wasn't going to touch on it until you brought it to the fore. But
there were various issues.
Yes.
Not least on how the court had dealt with the evidence of certain witnesses. There were technical errors as well, but the case ultimately wasn't overturned on a technical error. It was overturned on the evidence itself, which I think was important for the Nchindu family, and even for the purposes of public discourse. It wouldn't have augured well if the appeal had succeeded purely on technical grounds. The fact that it succeeded on evidential grounds, I think went to a large part to exonerate all the accusations of interference and from any of the parties. But given the very nature of the case and the persons involved, there will always be accusations one way or another. But the fact of the matter is that the record is there. It can be seen by the public.
Yes,
and people can check all the facts
exactly for themselves. So that was the time when you were arriving at Collins and Newman.
That's right.
And after Collins and Newman, that's when you went back to Bayford. Why did you leave? Because I mean, at the time, Collins and Newman was the biggest law firm in this city.
I didn't feel my career was going in the direction that I wanted it to go. Collins and Newman is a very it was a very large firm, a very successful firm, but it was a commercial firm. And I had always had my interest in issues of rights, and that wasn't really the sense of...
Sometimes you would clash on ideologies and which direction to take with...
A lot. Yeah.
I can understand that. Yes.
And huge respect to Pak Stafa. I mean, Pak Stafa, I won't deny it, taught me a lot. We don't see eye to eye in terms of political ideology, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't have knowledge to impart. And certainly he is a phenomenal legal mind.
Yeah, we have seen him at work.
Exactly.
We have seen him at work, especially during the Khama administration and all of that.
That was when he was at his height.
No, it doesn't come with at a surprise because of the background that you just laid down about the foundations and the influences of your ideologies, and then ultimately you'll find yourself in a law firm that's pro ruling, or maybe let me just say BDP. And like you are saying that you often clash, I don't think it comes as a surprise and all that.
I think I was also beneficial. There were two cases involving two ministers that we had that whilst we were there that I also dealt with. Madeluka, and if I'm not mistaken, it was Matambo. Kenneth, yes.
Yes, the former Minister of Finance.
Yeah,
yes.
They had both been charged, and although I didn't appear in court in either of those two, I prepared the arguments with Pax, and the arguments were both successful. We had taken some technical points on the charge sheets. I think in particular in respect of Madeluka, so it didn't go for trial.
With the Botswana police supplies case
something like that. Yeah,
yes.
And there was one with the house. I think that was Matambo.
Yes.
But anyway, so there was it was an informative time at Collins and Newman, but it just wasn't me. It wasn't.
And I'm sure the paycheck was good.
It was.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then you went back home. You retraced your steps back to the left leaning.
Left leaning, and almost immediately got into trouble.
When was that? 2015?
No, 2013, 2014, thereabouts. I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So towards the end of 2013, 2014. And when I say I immediately got into trouble, I guess I can discuss this now because these are issues that are in the public domain. And in fact, Nasha has referred to them in a rally. I know there's one rally where she mentions me. But Nasha and I go back, Dr. Nasha.
Yes.
We go back a long way. I was just a few months into practice, and she was MP for Gaborone Central, if I'm not mistaken. And I get a phone call, is that Salbany? And I say, yes, ma'am. This is Dr. Nasha. I want you to come over to my house now. Oh, okay. So I went over. This is in 99, beginning of 99. So I had a VW Beetle, an old VW Beetle. So I rock up at her house.
White rock boys.
I rock up at her house and she says, let's go. We are going to prison. I've got a friend who has been detained. And I was like, ma'am, I've only got the Beetle as transport. She said, I don't care, let's go. And we went, and I represented the friend on appeal. She was then acquitted, and Manasha and I developed a very strong bond. She's like my mother. She's another mother. I've got lots of mothers in Botswana. Many, many mothers. My Bayford is my mother. My Nasha is my mother. My Vincent is my mother. Yeah, there's lots.
Yeah, you've worked quite a lot with them over the years.
So anyway, back to 2014, Manasha gives me a call. In fact, it was her son, Tabiso, who gave me a call and said, Mama wants to speak to you.
Man went in exile, wherever he is.
I know where he is. We speak regularly. So she says to me, my son, I've got a problem. I've received this letter from the Attorney General, and they want to change the rules for Parliament. And they want the vote for the Vice President to be by way of show of hands.
That's the Lehenza case.
That's the Lehenza case.
Okay, you've moved towards it quickly. I was going to proceed. Yes. This is where all the nonsense happening in this republic started, right? Most of it.
I don't know. I don't know if all of it or most of it. I really don't know. Okay. But I think this was where a lot of the problems did start. And what had happened was that the then Attorney General wanted Manasha to go to court. The Attorney General wanted to go to court and wanted Manasha as the Speaker to concede the case, to file what is called a notice to abide.
Yes.
And the Speaker, the Attorney General was only going to cite the Botswana Democratic Party as the party that was pushing for the change. And Manasha gave me the letter, and it wasn't right. See, instinctively you could feel that it wasn't right. And Bayford and I sat and we went over the letter, we mulled over the letter, and we started planning what we were going to do. And it was in some ways unfortunate because it hurt certain friendships, but I spoke to the Attorney General, and that was on a Friday, and I was assured that the case wouldn't come before court, that the Attorney General's office was going to reconcile everything, and that the vote wasn't going to take place by way of a show of hands.
It needs to be a secret ballot.
It was going to be a secret ballot.
Per the Constitution.
And remember, at that time, there was the need for transparency because the BDP was fractured. And there were four or five contenders for the leadership of the BDP. And the favored contender was Tsekedi Khama, the former president's brother. And there was a division within the BDP that didn't want him to be president. And the reason why there needed to be a show of hands was because then they would be able to see who's loyal and who's not loyal to the party. That was the thinking.
Yes.
So we had spoken to the Attorney General. I had spoken to the Attorney General, and I had been assured that there was nothing that was going to come up in court from the Attorney General. And out of an abundance of caution, we wrote to the Chief Justice, and we said, in the event that anything is filed in respect of a matter of this nature, we should be notified because we would be interested parties. As at that time, the umbrella for democratic change, the UDC had already been formed at that time. So throughout the weekend I was calling the Attorney General until she pretty much got fed up with me. I think that was on Saturday evening or Sunday morning, I can't remember, and she told me, "Joao, this is not happening. There's no case." And so, okay, took it on face value.
Yeah.
On Monday morning, I told Ray Bayford, my gut is churning. And my gut was a lot smaller then than it is now. But I was very, very uncomfortable. And I went to the High Court and I asked the clerks if anything had been filed. And they tell me, "Oh, no, the Chief Justice is waiting for you." Chief Justice is waiting for me? Yes, he wants to talk to you. So I go see Justice Dibutelo, and he tells me, "Yes, Salbany, I've seen your letter. Have you received the application? Because we have received it." And it was an application from the Attorney General's office.
Oh.
So, of course, we were livid, and that was the beginning of Lahanza. And you know, Lawrence, one of the things that Ray Bayford has always instilled in me is there's public interest litigation where you will litigate on a matter of principle.
Yes.
It's not necessary that you win the case, but you bring public awareness about the issue that you are litigating on. This applies to the access to dockets, for example. That law was changed out of my case. Professor Good's case in 2005. These were cases that we didn't necessarily expect to win. We were happy that we did to a certain degree. It's not Professor Good's, but the Wasim Ahmed case, and many others. But the effect is to educate the public on pertinent issues involving democratic rights, human rights, etc. This is particularly important in the litigation that we used to do and the advisory work that we used to do involving the media. Of course, you know, you and I were arrested and detained in 2015. Yes. But there's a lot of public interest litigation that we were doing that we didn't necessarily expect the legal win, but we did expect a social awareness to grow out of it. And certainly Lahanza, at the beginning of it, we were not confident that we would win. It was the first of its kind anywhere in the world. Precedents were almost impossible to find because nothing like this had ever happened anywhere in the world. But we succeeded. We succeeded at the High Court and we succeeded at the Court of Appeal. And those judgments had a profound, or that judgment had a profound effect on the future of Botswana. That judgment created or elevated Masisi into the position of vice president, and which then
became chairperson and party president.
And party president and then president of the country. Had it not been for that victory, Masisi would not have been the chairperson and vice
because people
president.
would have been afraid to vote otherwise.
Exactly.
Because now they will be seen and be purged.
Exactly. And at that time, Masisi was seen as a compromise candidate for the BDP because he didn't strictly fall into the one category or the other category of the factions within the BDP. There's a lot involved in that dispute of 2014 around the succession plans of the BDP, but I think it's a common fact. I know Pakstafa has spoken about it. We were privy to various communications within the BDP.
Collins Newman was advising government at the time.
Yes, and they were representing the BDP. That's a history that has then shaped how Botswana evolved.
Yes.
And certainly that litigation created a framework in which I would like to believe Parliament became increasingly more independent, which was one of Manasha's key objectives. And it's a mantle which is nice to see that has been taken over by the current speaker. The current speaker is moving very rapidly to make Parliament more accessible, more independent, to ensure that it has greater say, and that power isn't so much focused on the executive, and it's spread more towards the people who the public have elected, which is Parliament, members of Parliament.
Okay. We will get there now, where all of these things now manifest and become something else that we see right now. My trajectory was, while we are still at the law firms, and then some of these cases that you do, we don't move past without highlighting one of my favorite cases that is bordered on the death penalty. I recall in the 90s, 1991, you and Bayford presided over a case where two convicts who were sentenced to death were actually acquitted because of your intervention. I think it's a powerful story because I'm told that the individuals are still alive today when they were supposed to go and face the hangman's noose. I would like you to take me on the background of this case, and more especially now because we are talking about the death penalty issue, which has resurfaced again, given some of these countries that have taken drastic measures and laws to put in place. Where did this whole story maybe begin, and what were its impacts on your career and also in the jurisprudence?
Lawrence, I've been in practice for 26 years. That was probably my first case.
You saved 2 lives. Okay.
2 lives.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just me. That was Bayford. But anyway, I had just joined Bayford and Associates.
As a babysitter.
As a babysitter. And the Chief Justice at the time, Renganunu, he called and he said that he had a case that he was very unhappy with, and he wanted Bayford to look it over. And at that time, Bayford was involved with BNF internal politics. So I was given the file to see what we could do. And going through the file, there was an issue of an interpreter, and the interpreter had been the prosecutor's driver. And it was, again, this instinct that says something is wrong about this. But I couldn't quite figure it out. And then Ray Bayford looked at it when I discussed it with him. He looked at it and said, no, but was this interpreter sworn in? So we then had to go to the registrar, find out if there had been a swearing in. We discovered that there hadn't been. And so we argued that the interpreter, when translating into English, that their evidence is hearsay. And we went to the Court of Appeal, and we didn't challenge any of the evidence. We just focused on that. And the Court of Appeal agreed with us.
That there should be a retrial.
That there should be a retrial. So they agreed with us that the evidence was hearsay and that there should be a retrial. And that's the leading case in Botswana in respect of the right to an interpreter, not to be tried in the language, because there was a previous, Agnes Bojang was a previous case in that respect, but the right to be tried by an interpreter, a competent interpreter, etc., etc. So that, at the High Court, that trial had lasted a day. And these two gentlemen were sentenced to death. They were Basarwa. They had been tortured by game wardens.
Ghana, what were they being accused of?
Murder.
Actually, you skipped that. No. I mean, the incident. I hear the story was that they had gone hunting.
They had gone hunting.
There were 3 of them, and only 2.
And only 2 came back. That's
yes.
right. And they were being accused of having murdered their colleague Fumuti.
He was missing both and his horse.
Both
never found.
Never found, but the saddle had been found up in a tree. I can't remember some of the nitty-gritty details, yes. but in any event, the Court of Appeal agreed with us, but because it was such a technical point, they ordered that there be a retrial. We did the retrial over the span of 2 years. Ray Bayford went to Hukunsi. He went to speak to family members of the community, found out what conditions they were being subjected to by the game wardens when there are incidences of poaching, what the wardens would call poaching, what the indigenous people in the area call survival.
Survival and hunting.
Yes.
Yes.
So, based on that, well, like I said, we did the trial for 2 years. They were still on death row because of the technical acquittal. And eventually they were acquitted by the High Court, again, because it had been sent back to the High Court. And yeah, it was an interesting experience. It was my first case.
So at first there was a mistrial and a retrial because of that technical aspect of the interpreter. Now the evidence not being.
They had objected to the fact that the interpreters. Sekhalakadi, is that correct?
Yes.
Was not the same dialect as what they were using.
It was a different sect of Sekhalakadi.
Exactly. And so...
then obviously you go for retrial, which means it's a fresh case.
It's a fresh case.
So which arguments then lead you to getting them acquitted?
Well, we were able to show, because the first conviction was on circumstantial evidence, we were able to show that they had been subjected to police brutality, they had been tortured, The initial story was that they had been attacked by a lion and then separated. Their subsequent stories were that they had murdered their colleague, melted him, and then flown on a chicken bone from one end of the game reserve to Francistown, if I recall correctly.
There was some witchcraft.
There's a witchcraft, yes. But that was after they had been subjected to torture for several days. And remember, in court proceedings, is there doubt that the accused committed the offense? And we put them in the stand, which was a marked difference from what had previously happened, and they testified. And they testified also as to their torture, as to the circumstances of their detention, of what the game wardens had been insisting that they say, the story about the witchcraft. And and for those reasons, the court then found that the state had not proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt.
The poor men, they were just going to hang just like that,
yeah,
and all the likes. And this was in the 90s, especially at the time where civic movement on death penalty wasn't that extremely robust in Botswana, or maybe information was just as scanty as the times were. So now, what does it mean in the now when we are looking at the death penalty? One interesting question that has been obviously lingering on people's minds is that His Excellency the President Duma Boko, he himself being a human rights lawyer who has defended accused people where death penalty is concerned and whatnot. Now he is sitting at the helm of of all of these things. What kind of direction is he going to take in terms of the death penalty law? Will he scrape it? Will he keep it? We know we've seen public sentiment. A lot of Botswana say, hey, we are pro this law. We want it. If you dare remove it, we will see you in 2025. But then again, all these other things then that come at play, like you just told of a story that now says, what if? So what is your view on all these dynamics as they are?
Well, ironically, I was in another media house just yesterday speaking about the death penalty. The death penalty is it's an emotive argument for those that advocate for the death penalty. And it is, in my view, devoid of a legal basis and devoid of morality. It is purely based on retribution and revenge. You have killed somebody, so you must die. And like I said yesterday, you know, largely it is the religious right. And I'm not saying, I want to emphasize this is not religious groups, because there are many religious groups that are very anti the death penalty. But we seem to have, by and large, whether you call them fire churches, water churches, whatever the case may be, a religious right group that is very pro death penalty. And if you look at it from a religious perspective, my argument would be, well, Jesus died for the sins of mankind.
Okay.
And you've got a person who has committed a sin, but that sin is absolved by the death of Christ. So who are we to inflict punishment on that person? Because they have been absolved. Maybe that's a very simplistic argument as a non-religious person, but I think it stands. there's another passage in the Bible where there's the woman who had committed adultery and she was going to be stoned. And Jesus says to the crowd,
he who without sin shall cast
the first stone. And no one cast the first stone. Lawrence, we are so obsessed with the fact that somebody does something evil, and murder most certainly is evil, in whichever form, whether it's a single murder, whether it's a multiple murder, that we forget that a person is more than the one evil that they have committed. There's more to a person than just that single act of evilness, or in the case of a serial killer, multiple killings. But humans have an inherent right to dignity. Doesn't matter how evil or how atrocious they may have been. And these are values that I think we are losing as a society, because we are so focused on pettiness. If I don't like Lawrence, I just need to spread a rumor around, and then all of a sudden that rumor becomes reality. Maybe it's become more pronounced with social media and access to information that is not actually based on fact. Call it propaganda, call it fake news. I don't like the term fake news.
Well, half of the time, Botswana's biggest argument into this is that it becomes more of a deterrence of crime, and maybe the argument on justice for victims, really, I don't like weighing in much on that, because how do you gauge it in my element? But the deterrence of crime, we have argued that you see a lot of most evil and atrocious crimes in South Africa, our neighbor. They fear coming into Botswana because they know that we have the death penalty. Those are some of the arguments that you see as you go along. I don't know how you weigh in on those.
I think that's a fallacy. First of all, there's no statistics anywhere in the world that show that the death sentence is a deterrent. In fact, the US, which still has a death sentence, is a clear example that it is not a deterrent. You look at the mass killings in the US, there are more mass killings than any other country in the world, and yet they've got the death penalty. So I think the deterrent argument is not a realistic argument. Why people don't come to Botswana to commit crime? There's borders. It's difficult to smuggle arms and guns into another country. The chances of getting caught in a place that you are unfamiliar is higher.
But still, people still commit more murders in gender-based violence
Remember, the death sentence only applies to premeditated murder. It applies to certain other offenses under the BDF Act as well. Mutiny, inviting a foreigner to
terrorism,
insurrection. Terrorism, no. Terrorism is not it's not an offense under Botswana law that carries a death penalty. The circumstance of a death penalty without extenuating circumstances is limited. Certainly, if there's a robbery and somebody dies, yes, that would invoke or trigger the death penalty at the High Court. But it's not a deterrent for the so-called foreigners coming into the country and not committing offenses. I think the realistic situation is that every country likes to blame its surrounding neighbors for its crime. You go to South Africa, they will blame Zimbabweans and Mozambicans. You go to Angola and they will blame Zimbabwe and South Africa. Botswana seems to be pretty much isolated. We're a small population.
Peaceful nation, yeah.
The Americans blame Mexico and south of, your Colombias and your Peru, etc., whatever the case may be. So I think there's a general trend worldwide that our people don't commit offenses. It's our neighbors.
Yes.
But you go to the prisons, and the percentage of prisoners that are foreigners are very small. The vast majority of prisoners are local, indigenous people. So I think the argument on the death penalty being a deterrent, I don't think it's a valid argument. And
okay.
And you see, the death penalty, it's an interesting topic. One of the lecturers at University of Botswana in the mid 1980s, Ramakua, did a paper where he wrote that the death penalty was an alien concept under traditional law, pre-colonial law, that we didn't have the death penalty under Tswana law.
That's interesting.
That the form of punishment was banishment, that you would send somebody out of the community. And that does seem to be a common thread under pre-colonial African culture.
We were not killers.
We were not killers. We would banish. And like I said yesterday, we all remember the story of Okonko, Things Fall Apart. When he killed, he was not sentenced to death. He was banished. So this, again, I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not a sociologist, I can't speak to these things, but Ramakua was an academic. I'm taking his academic paper at face value, and I would assume that it is correct.
But also, if you say that, because it's not like at the time there was no killing. There were people who were killing others and committing murders over fighting over land, women, this and that, power, food, whatever was the commodities at the time. If you say they were getting just banished, was it not encouraging barbarism?
Well, I can't speak to that, but isn't banishment a more severe form of punishment? There is an argument that says if you hang a murderer, that is the end of his punishment. He's done. He no longer suffers. And if he accepts God, according to religious teachings, he will go to heaven. But if you keep him in jail for life, which is a modern form of banishment, he is suffering for the rest of his life.
Let our taxpayer cost.
Well, again, Lawrence, you have to look at these things. In 2018, your former publication wrote on various questions by Remo Jaha and Reki Ropetse in Parliament around the secrecy that pertained to the actual implementation of the death penalty. Yes. Why was there no notification given to the family? Why was it kept so secret? What processes were involved? And the fact that for 5 years Botswana hadn't been able to get a hangman. And so
no one wanted the job.
No one wanted the job. And so what they did was that senior officials within the prison service were given an additional allowance of 15% of their salary to execute. And then there were objections by the junior staff that that 15% should be applicable to them because they were also involved in the execution. So if you come to me and tell me that there's a cost factor involved, let us look at the statistics. How much does it cost the state to keep somebody incarcerated? And how much does it cost the state to pay all these special expenses for a period now that was 2018 and it had already been going on for a period of a year or 2 years to 2024. I can assure you that the cost of special allowances would exceed the cost of having what we on average have is 2 or 3 prisoners on death row. We have currently...
I'll take this on assignment, yes.
Yeah, do so, because I would be interested to know. Last week, the Commissioner of Prisons was on radio, confirming that there are 17 death row inmates,
Yes.
4 of which have lost their appeals, 13 of which have their appeals pending. I've never, in my 30 years in Botswana, heard of having so many people on death row.
But isn't it, you just mentioned that for 5 years there was no hanging?
But yes. we have had hangings in between.
In between.
And it has been carried out by prison officials. Reki Rapetse raised a very important issue when he was Member of Parliament, is that have these senior officials been trained in the method of execution?
Yeah.
Do they know how to tie the knots? Do they know what sort of rope to use? So, we might think these things are...
Counseling as well.
Counseling. Yes. We might think these things are very basic, but they are important. The death by hanging is brutal, but it is supposed to happen in such a way that the neck breaks, so that you die instantly. You don't suffocate. But if it is not done properly, you suffocate to death. And these were the type of questions that were being asked, because it goes directly to the issue of, is hanging a humane method of execution? And the death sentence has been extensively litigated on. Ntisang is Attorney General versus Ntisang in the 90s raised this issue. Kobedi's case, which has been in discussion lately because of the Kata Murapisi case, has been in discussion a lot as well. It raised a lot of these questions as well. But we have clawback provisions in our rights sections of our Constitution. So the right to life, for example, under Section 4 of the Constitution, is clawed back to say that everyone has a right to life, save as may be ordered by a court. So it's claws back. And then we've got Section 70, which is the right to not to be subjected to inhumane and degrading treatment, which says that any form of punishment prior to the birth of the current constitution, so a colonial legacy, shall be valid under the current constitution.
Okay.
So we carried on a colonial legacy into our current constitution. And when you talk about a government that is now based on rights, rights and human dignity, and we want to get rid of our colonial legacies, then we need to get rid of something as barbaric as the death sentence.
Is it just a matter of that? I can hear your line of reasoning, or is it an issue of maybe doing a public referendum to also involve Botswana and their opinions in the repealing or amendment of this piece of legislation? What will be because it also carries political consequences for whoever is in power anyway with the context of our country. But I understand that also as a politician, you don't want to just willy-nilly make decisions that will cost you elections, capital, and all the likes. But you have to find a somewhat an intricate balance in between all of these.
Lawrence, I wouldn't put, my personal opinion is I wouldn't put an issue of the death penalty to a referendum. I believe the issue of life and death is vested in the courts. Because they're the ones who determine rights and dignity of individuals. Government can have a policy that recognizes them, but it's the court that enforces them. And that would take away political pressure from a government. Justice Khama was here in the 90s. He was brought by the Law Society. And he was one of the judges that sat over the case that abolished the death penalty in South Africa. And one of the things during discussions that we had with him was that he was personally in favor of the death penalty. And he said the vast majority of South Africans were in favor of the death penalty. But the law had developed and grown, that it was no longer conscionable to maintain the death penalty, and therefore it had to be abolished. To unpackage the issue of the death penalty, I think we can use another emotive example. 150 years ago, it was acceptable to sell people. It was acceptable to brand people.
Slavery, yes.
Slavery.
Yes.
Society developed and progressed, and those were things that were abolished because they are inherently wrong. They undermine human dignity, human life. I think we've reached a stage in society where we must think along those lines. There's a group of lawyers in the United States that have formed an organization called the Innocence Project. And over the last 50 years, they have undone 190 convictions and death sentences.
Damn. Across the world?
No,
in the US alone. Yes.
The US alone. And what happens then is that many of these people have hung. So this isn't just, these are historical, these are legacy cases where they have gone and looked at cases and said, but why was this person convicted? So what we need to accept, just with those statistics, is that there are going to be mistakes, that innocent people are going to hang.
A miscarriage of justice.
There's going to be a miscarriage of justice. And we then need to ask ourselves, those that are pro-death penalty, is that how many innocent people does it take to be hung in order for you to justify the killing of that one serial killer, that one person who planned to murder his wife or his husband? Because the system is flawed. The legal system is inherently flawed because we are people. And we make mistakes. Doesn't matter how well-intentioned, how brilliant a lawyer you are, how brilliant a judge you are. Mistakes happen. We know police abuse their roles. We know police profile people. We know defense attorneys don't prepare. We know that evidence gets lost.
Or can be cooked.
Or can be cooked.
There's politicization also.
Also of people and issues.
Yes.
I remember a time when there was an outcry about rape in Botswana. and government introduced a law where if you were charged with rape, you couldn't get bail. I remember being at the office, and within a week or 2 weeks of that law passing, we were inundated with clients who had been charged with rape.
Jesus.
Because it was a quick way. And I'm not saying that this was a thing that was justified, but it was a quick way for people
to weaponize the
to
piece of
weaponize-
legislation for extortion, for all sorts of things.
Exactly. So that goes to show your point. So if we accept that the death penalty is going to hang innocent people just to secure a conviction against one, is that the type of society that we want? And the death penalty, it creates an inhuman conditions. Prison guards taunt people on death row. The very case that you were speaking of, the two old gentlemen who are on death row, they were constantly being tormented by the prison guards that they were going to hang. And you'll recall one of them was a paraplegic. He had had polio as a child and he didn't have mobility on his legs or for his legs. And they used to taunt him about how he would hang with his legs being folded. So these are the type of barbaric situations that happen. And surely this can't be the type of society that we want. It's certainly not the society that I want my children to grow up in, where vengeance must be the order of the day. So when you ask what options does...
The alternatives.
The alternatives.
To that, yes.
Well, for me, I think somebody, one of the death row inmates needs to go to court, needs to highlight the disparities in how the prerogative of mercy is treated. We had tried it in 2015, then I had to leave the country. But at that time, the Attorney General had said that the prerogative of mercy was not a prerequisite to hanging. And the Constitution certainly requires it to be a prerequisite. So I think, and what we had done with Martin Dingake is that we had asked for a laid out procedure, because the prerogative of mercy can lay out its own procedures. And we said, well, it can lay out its own procedures, but those procedures must be in writing so that we know what it is that, as lawyers, we are supposed to do.
Yes.
But the Court of Appeal had said, no, clearly the Attorney General made a silly mistake, and in a shocking judgment. But be that as it may, I think those issues need to be revisited so that the court can then impose a moratorium on the death penalty, so that you don't need to get the politicians involved. And then we have been promised a review of the Constitution. And we need to take away the colonial legacy that has remained in our current Constitution. And then ask the courts to reinterpret the right to life and the death sentence in light of the new Constitution, whilst the moratorium is in place, so that we don't get the politicians involved at all. And in that way, we can have a situation where we can have a debate and still say, but this is what the courts have found. And we respect the courts, and we have to respect what the courts say in respect of rights. We are all happy when the courts say you have the right to water, you have the right to housing, you have the right to education. When it comes to the right of life, we are not so happy.
There's a lot of wizardry going on in our hearts.
A lot.
Vengeance and
Yes.
anger and all the likes as a society. Okay, that's quite interesting. I guess it's an ongoing debate. We'll keep on hearing how the opinions fly around and maybe how the powers that be will look at it as they unroll in their new tenure. So, my man, you appeared twice.
No, once.
You were actually declared
a prohibited immigrant once.
Your residence permits were revoked 3 times, and then you appeared once.
Yes.
Yes.
After I was arrested with you.
Those were interesting times. That was 2016, right?
2015.
2015.
8th of May.
Jesus, you remember even the vivid dates. I've been trying to move away from that dark era most of my life.
No, that date lingers long in my memory.
Because after that, a lot quite happened in your life in particular.
So 8th of May, the DCEC raided the Gazette, and we held them off for quite a while. They had wanted access to a computer. The search warrant was defective.
Yes, my computer.
Your computer. I wasn't going to say it, but yes, it was your computer. The search warrant was defective. By the time they got a new warrant, despite the fact that they knew that you were represented and the Gazette was represented, they went to court, despite the fact that we told them we will oppose the application. And they then came back with a new warrant. By then it was after dark. And in terms of the Criminal Procedure and Evidence Act, if they get a warrant that's after dark, it has to be, it has to specifically say. They were extremely upset. The following morning they came back. There were still problems with the search warrant. And I think at that stage they had had enough. And
hey, that's because they came with the first search warrant. Then you punch holes in it and say that it needs to be specific as to what exactly are they looking for and whose office and whether they are investigating us or anyone at the Gazette. They went to amend it.
Yes.
When they came with the second one, you also told them there are challenges also in the second one. You are not stipulating whether you are investigating the Gazette for something or not and whatnot, and if there are charges.
The main issue was the fact that they said that they wanted a computer. And when they served a warrant, it's supposed to be clear on the face of the warrant what it is that they're looking for. And we were saying, well, it could be this computer, it could be that computer, and they wouldn't know any better. But the long and short of it is that the night before, I had called two of my colleagues, Unoda and Reboko, and told them, look, this is what's happening, and I think the following day we will be detained, which is what transpired. We were then detained.
Yes, Khama, it was Reboko and Unoda who came and negotiated for our releases.
Yes. Well, Reboko came to the cell. Remember, I was being moved from one cell to another.
Yes.
I was taken to Urban, I was taken to Broadhurst, and then I was taken to Mogoditsane. And then Reboko went to get me from Mogoditsane and got me released. And that cell was awful. Hey, it was a carpet, not even a carpet, a blanket on the floor. There were no benches. You could see the lice and the fleas walking around on it. And the toilet, the feces was overflowing on the toilet. But anyway, it was
crawling. Yes.
One of the ironies of it is one of the guys who was driving me around from police station to police station, a DCEC officer, Subsequently became
Your junior.
my junior, and one of my closest associates at DCEC.
So, interesting. So, what's his explanation to that? Was he getting instructions? Is it the modus operandi?
No, they were getting instructions, and at the time I think it was their modus operandi. That, most of the institutions around, whether it was the DIS, DCEC, police, they didn't really care how a warrant was worded. They just...
What's the whole moving you around now has to do with?
Oh, I think they were well aware that Duma and Unoda were looking for me to see, to find out where I was. And yeah, the easiest thing was to move me around so that I couldn't be found.
Kind of the background of this thing basically was that we had published a story on some of the deals that were there were allegations of corruptions.
Yes, ranging from, in respect of the petrol industry.
Yes, in respect of the petrol industry. Then there's things that came with NPF and all of that. Then you find that at the time there was a guy who had exiled and ran away. And now what the intelligence community was saying was that we had published contents that look like they are part of their investigation, of an ongoing investigation docket, which are under the DCEC Act. Is it Section 21 or something?
I can't even remember now.
One of those sections of the DCEC Act prohibits anyone to publish information related to an ongoing investigation. Yeah, then we were arrested, Shige at the time and Innocent at the time. So I recall when I was where they were holding us, I was able to get a phone call. I think that was when Unoda came and he was... And we are busy in all of this, and SABC is asking for an interview. So we spit fire, give them all the news. Now there's all these international backlash because now the news are getting out of control. It was day 3 of a standoff. The Gazette office was barricaded and all the likes.
Well, remember earlier I had said that there is public interest litigation.
Yes.
And certainly at the time, you will recall that there was a lot of pushback on the media.
Yes.
Sunday Standard had been raided over the Don McKenzie investigations into Isaac Kgosi. The Gazette had been raided. I think Mechi had been raided as well. But there was a lot of pushback against the media.
And a lot of slap lawsuits against the media. Yes.
And even the Attorney General had sought an injunction as well, which Bayford and I had then opposed, so that when the media houses published the contents of the Don McKenzie report, certain names would be left out.
Left out, yes.
So I think we had reached a point when the DCEC raided the Gazette, that really this was now going a step too far. The media was being severely undermined at that time. Botswana's ratings in respect of media freedom had also dropped considerably.
And remember, we had received quite a lot of death threats.
Exactly. But I think death threats were common cause. I remember being in the car driving to Lubatse with Duma, and that was in 2005. We were doing Professor Good's case. And even then, we had cell phones, but normally a number appears, and then it's either appears, or if somebody is hiding the number, it would say unknown. But I received a phone call that was just like a dot or two dots. And somebody was threatening me to say that I would be deported just like Professor Good if I carried on representing him. Mind you, that was in 2005. When we reported it to the police, they couldn't find any trace of a phone call on my phone. And I know Boko received threats as well. But back to the raid on the Gazette, I think it had gotten to a point where things were really, the media was under pressure. And so what we had done was that we had organized with the Editors Forum that following the closure of the office at night, all the media houses should come to the Gazette. You remember?
Yes.
All the
yes. There was a lot of mobilization.
Exactly.
At the time. Yes.
And I think that also then embarrassed Masiretse at DCEC, Rose.
And Isaac.
Yes. Well, I don't think it embarrassed Isaac. I think I pissed him off. Excuse the language. I hope that's permissible on your podcast. I would use a much stronger language. But yeah, I think that they were annoyed. Speaking of the late Isaac Kgosi, the first time I ever met him, you know, some of the things that you do when you are a young lawyer. There were two gentlemen that had been, not gentlemen, two suspects that had been accused of murder. And they had fled to South Africa. And the Botswana police had crossed the border, picked them up, put them in the boot of their cars, not even the back of the vans, just in the boot, and brought them back. And I was assigned to represent them. And at that time, the South African Constitutional Court had delivered a judgment it's called the Mohammed case, where they said that the extradition to the US was unlawful by the South African government. So I appeared before the judge and I said, these guys, they need to go back to South Africa because they haven't been extradited lawfully. And the judge was furious with me. He was livid. He even threatened to lock me up. But I stood my ground. Madambe, now Justice Dambe, was the prosecutor with Mema Mangori. And the judge postponed the case. And I threatened to move this constitutional application. And Madambe says that no, she's arranged a meeting. And I said, not a problem. And she calls me a couple of days later. Mr. Salbany, come to AG's chambers. And I go, and there was Re Karahindi, who was head of special ops at the police. There was, I think, the deputy commander of BDF. There was Isaac Kgosi. All these guys in uniform. There were about 7 or 8 of them. And then Madambe and myself. Hey, I've never felt so intimidated in my life. But I stood my ground. I argued my point. And there's a procedure where if a country has a death sentence and the country that people are being extradited from doesn't, then they can't extradite unless there is a presidential decree saying that in the event that they get sentenced to death, the death penalty won't be imposed. Be imposed. I got that decree from Remohai after that meeting. It's the only, to my knowledge, it's the only one that's ever been issued in Botswana.
Nice.
The story doesn't end there,
Fighting for
Lawrence.
criminals. Let's continue. Yes.
The story doesn't end there. A couple of years later, they were convicted. They were sentenced to death. And I was arguing now that because of the presidential decree, the death sentence was unlawful because the country couldn't execute because of the decree. So these people, these two gentlemen, were going to have to be on death row for the rest of their lives, whereas they should have just been issued with a life sentence. The week we were going to argue the case, the office got broken into. Of all the files that were stolen, that file was stolen. When we went to court, the prosecutor, he's late now, denied that there was ever such a decree. I'm not generally a short-tempered person, but that day I was appalled. I think the voice captured me pointing a finger at the prosecutor. But we were fortunate because going through the record then with a fine-tooth comb, we found just one small passage, or one sentence, where the court had made reference to that decree, the presidential decree. And on our next appearance, the prosecutor, because I had insisted that I would call Madambi to come and testify, and everyone else that had been in that meeting where I'd obtained the decree to come and testify. And the lawyer, the member of DPP had to eat humble pie and acknowledge that in fact there was that decree and they were never sentenced to death. But that was the first time I met Isaac Kgosi face to face. And it was an interesting experience. After that, my relationship with Kgosi was tenuous.
The fire and water.
Fire and water.
Yes.
We fought many battles. But I think we had a good respect between us. Many years later, after he had left the DIS, we met, and he said to me, Salbany, it was never a personal issue. You just were a persistent thorn in my side.
And you PI'd you? No, he got you PI?
No, he didn't PI.
Who PI'd you? Obviously, it was the president.
Yes, it was the president.
Around the bush.
Yeah.
Basically, my question was trying to say, did he PI you at his own volition, or there was a recommendation from Kgosi at the time, given the run-ins that were happening consistently, more especially between the media, you representing us as the media, and the media at the time being a thorn in Khosi's...
When Masisi undid my PI, I went to meet him. He had said that he would apologize to me personally, and I never thought that he actually would. But then one day I got a phone call, and I was told, His Excellency is waiting for you. And I go to his office. Masisi.
Okay.
And Masisi says to me, Salbany, how come I don't know you? And I was like, Your Excellency, I don't know. I know most of your compatriots, most of the people, but you and I, we've never actually met face to face. And he showed me a file, so big. That's your file, Salbany.
LAV of this number one.
I had represented Wasim Ahmed, the boy who had kidnapped Satar Dada's grandson. That had triggered some police, I don't know what they do, information gathering on me, which was in my file. During that trial, there was this gentleman, I can't remember his name, but he was a bodyguard. He has some Greek name. And he had walked into court armed. And I told the magistrate, please ask this gentleman to be removed or otherwise remove his weapons. That had triggered off some consternation as well. When we were doing Daisilu,
He was an agent.
At that time, we didn't have the DIS, so he was a private person.
Okay.
I don't know whether he had been engaged by a member of the family to protect their interests. But the fact is that he was armed, and I could see, I saw he was wearing a shoulder holster and asked for it to be removed. And then we did the Daisilu case. It was myself, Duma, Unoda, Sebejo, Tebogo Sebejo. There were quite a few of us. I think anyway.
Yeah, that was a big case.
That was a big case. We did that case for about 9 years. But during that case, the presiding magistrate was appointed to the High Court. And we raised an argument that even though he hadn't taken up the office, the mere fact that he had been appointed meant that he couldn't continue sitting as a magistrate.
Conflict?
No, it's the law, because he's no longer, effectively, he's no longer a magistrate.
Okay.
And we had cases from various jurisdictions. So we were then called in for a meeting by Chief Justice Nganunu. And we were threatening to raise that there was an undue delay in prosecuting the case. I think Dijeng will be able to tell you the story in detail, and Unoda as well, but in any event. So we had this meeting, and we were offered compensation for our legal fees in order to not pursue the claim of undue delay.
Yes.
Some of my colleagues, I won't say whom, wanted to accept the compensation, and I was dead set against it. So there was a person there keeping the minutes of the meeting, and when we go back to the magistrates' court now to continue with the trial, we rejected the offer ultimately.
Yes.
When we go back to continue the trial, this person who was keeping the records was now the presiding, keeping the minutes, was now the presiding magistrate.
Oh.
And I said, no, you can't be the presiding magistrate because you were privy to discussions that we had with the Chief Justice Nganunu.
Yes.
And I applied for his recusal. And he refused to recuse himself. So I said to him, well, I believe you are a witness. In case the clients get convicted, you would be able to testify as to issues to mitigate the sentence. And so I grabbed the prosecutor, I went around to the clerk of court, and got a subpoena issued in the magistrate's name. And went and served the magistrate.
So now they have to come and testify.
Now he has to come and testify.
Yes.
Served the magistrate, and then of course he, on his own volition, recused himself. And in recusing himself, he severely rebuked me. Severely rebuked me. But I maintain that I was right.
Yes. So there was this background to the Daisy Lou case for those who generally don't know or have recollection, just in a nutshell. It was a corruption case.
It was a corruption case.
Yeah.
The Daisy Lou was a corruption case. Daisy Lou had been engaged to do bush clearing in central Gaborone. And the issue arose because then President Khama had directed that the city centre up to Sekgodisani be cleared. And Daisy Lou went ahead and cleared. Well, the president had indicated to City Council, and City Council then sought to implement what the president had directed, and directed Daisy Lou to clear, and Daisy Lou cleared, and then came up with a bill of I can't remember, but it was in excess of 20 million. And then the whole question arose is how did this contract come about? Ultimately, Daisy Lou was successful, and the money was returned to them with interest. I think it was almost 40 million at the time.
Jesus.
But yeah, that's also all public record. But ultimately, Daisy Lou was acquitted of it. But I think these cases also show a tendency where there has been a degeneration within the civil service. I think there's a point in time where the civil service became beholden to senior political figures and forgot its key functions as the servants of Botswana. And that civil service is not an extension of the party that is in power at the time. And really, there was that period from really about 2004, maybe 2003, all the way through until present, where we see a lot of civil servants really having political agendas and even subsequently following political careers. And that's unfortunate, because really a civil servant is, of course, they have their political they have their political affiliations and their political associations, but when they hold office, they don't hold office for a political agenda.
Yes. So when we came into these Daisy Lou and other examples that you are highlighting, I was trying to gain an understanding on, then Masisi shows you this big file, which was obviously being compiled over the years by the previous admin and all the likes. Clearly, as you highlighted, you're a problem child. You are making the country difficult to govern. So what was the PI, or what did it say? Or did it give any reasons why you're a PI? I know sometimes the president doesn't have to give reasons. And then these were followed by your rejection of residential status and work permits.
So after the Gazette case, my work and residence permits were cancelled. Bayford appealed. And when he appealed, the Minister for Immigration and Home Affairs was Rebatsu. And Rebatsu simply told him that, I can't remember the exact wording, but Salbany is a problem, so no. But then the unions used to call me in. Bufepuso, Botswana Teachers Union, and Bupeo. And then remember they had a seminar on the electronic voting machines. And
I recall when you came here to present a paper on
that.
Yes.
So I presented the paper on the electronic voting machines, highlighting some of the problems with the electronic voting
Which
machines.
you were trying to do shopping for extra
Yes,
at the time.
Yes, they had already passed the legislation, or the legislation had, I think it was waiting ascension by the president. Excuse me. And I think it was aired live on radio. I think the following day there were demonstrations at City Centre against the introduction of the EVMs. And whilst I was here, I was also invited to speak on constitutional review, which I did. And then I was invited by Gabs FM to speak on Khama at the time was traveling around the country, and he was being bestowed retirement gifts. And there was a lot of debate as to the propriety of these actions. And I was invited to speak on them. And under the Corruption Act, the receipt of any gift by a government official is deemed to be corruption. And it is incumbent upon that government official to show that
It is not.
It is not.
Basically, yeah. I was
And-
about to say that not every gift means that it's corruption.
Exactly.
Yes.
And, well, apparently that infuriated the powers that be. So my PI started under the Khama administration, but it was actually signed by Masisi. And I didn't.
When he was vice president.
No, I think 2 days after he assumed office as president, because it was on his desk as part of the things that he needed to sign. But I was never served with the PI. I was leaving the country.
Yeah, this is strange. Okay.
So I was leaving the country
Yes.
after the Gabs FM interview. And I had traveled by bus.
Because of the permits and work residence
Yes.
issues you had left.
So I
Came
had-
here, caused a bit of trouble, and you're campaigning.
I wasn't causing
Yes.
trouble. I was speaking about voters' rights.
Yes.
And so I was leaving because my days had run out. When I get to the border, two gentlemen pulled me aside and put me in one of the rooms there. Mind you, the bus is waiting. And we're like, what are you doing in the country? Why are you in the country, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, oh, what's the problem, gentlemen? They were like, no, you've been declared a prohibited immigrant. That was the first time I heard that I'd been declared a prohibited immigrant, when I was leaving the country. But that was at the time of the change of administration from Khama to Masisi.
After the Lehenza cases. Yeah.
Oh, well after,
This is
well
way
after.
back, yeah.
What Masisi had explained to me was that the process for me being declared a prohibited immigrant had started under the previous administration. And when he had assumed office, he had seen the paperwork and assumed, like so many other things, that if your predecessor leaves, you need to sign.
Yes.
And had signed it. And the minute it had become public that I'd been declared a prohibited immigrant, he had received phone calls from journalists, businessmen, fellow politicians across various aisles, and even some judges had intervened. And that is why when he reflected on it, he decided that he would undo the prohibited immigrant status. I said it then and I say it now.
Yes, but then now you fast forward, the president appoints you to the DCEC?
No, the president didn't appoint me to the DCEC.
Come on.
No, he didn't.
Who appointed you?
Rema Tambo. German, Andre German. A wonderful chap. We've had our disagreements.
Technically, you're not going to be appointed at the DCEC without the blessings of the president? You especially, and the caliber of that office.
Lawrence.
You also needed clearance. But
okay. That could well be. But as far as I'm concerned, the person who recruited me to the DCEC were Andre German and Brigadier Matambo. I applied. Brigadier Matambo had called me. He had asked me to go in and see him. He said that he had a problem because they didn't have an anti-money laundering unit, and because of the grey listing, it was something that needed to be established. We discussed various matters from Nchindu to the EVMs to a whole bunch of stuff. And then he asked me to apply for the position. I applied, and he called me a week or so later and said, start. And that is how I ended up at the DCEC. I'm not saying that it wasn't without the blessing of Masisi, because my appointing authority was the private secretary to the president, or the permanent secretary to the president, I beg your pardon. So there must have been some interaction there at that level. But the person who pushed for my recruitment was Brigadier Matambo.
Okay, so subsequently we'll get into some of the works and things that happened there. Subsequently, you are back into the red status again now, because the same people who then lifted the PI, your contract ended and then they did not renew it. What's the current status, and what happened between then and now, when you're sitting across President Masisi sharing these beautiful pleasantries to you now be seen all alone again back in Pretoria?
Well, Rekatlolo had requested that my contract be renewed. And he had done it timelessly. We had done everything that was supposed to be done. But I think the DCEC at the time was investigating some high-profile people. I haven't listened to the whole of his interview with you, so I don't know the extent of which he has gone into that. But he was investigating some high-profile people.
It was a bit more about the butterfly stuff, the case that was in the public domain.
Yeah.
Yes.
But then I think those people that were being investigated pushed back. Rekatlolo has a saying that when you fight corruption, corruption fights back. And corruption, when it's senior government positions or senior government persons, fights back hard. So I had applied for a work and residence permit to set up a law firm after my stint at DCEC. And I submitted my applications, and I was told, no, I don't need to submit an application for a residence permit because I still had a few more months on my residence permit. And I had traveled in and out of Botswana. I'd gone to see family. I had taken the children to see the grandparents in Pretoria, come back. And then one day I've got 6 immigration cars parked outside my yard. I called Bayford to come help. Went to immigration, they cancelled that permit, and they gave me a month to leave.
What
and
were
that's
the reasons?
No reasons given.
So basically, for me, from my recollection, when you returned there, because you were not there, you were there for like 4 years, 5.
Which at DCEC?
DCEC.
3 years.
Yeah, 3 years. And you came at the time where the whole butterfly case and the charges against former senior government officials was ongoing by the new administration. All of these things were flying thick and thin. Like I'm saying, a point in case to highlight is the butterfly case, which was also handed to you to work with. You will correct me if I'm wrong. There was a famous audio that was flying around that was leaked from a meeting that happened in which at least you were saying that maybe things need to be done right in terms of how the case and the prosecution was going. Some of us do believe that maybe that's what got you axed out of your job.
It could have been. I think there was a variety of reasons. I believe that there was an attempt to weaponize government institutions for political purpose. And things that were being done that were unconscionable. Things that were supposed to have gone through either myself and I was to have taken it to Rematambo initially, and then Rekatlolo after he succeeded Rematambo, were being circumvented completely. The DPP went to court without having any documentation from the DCEC, but went in our name. And this was just not on. And when we analyzed the evidence, there was simply no evidence. So when you speak up about these things...
These are part of the court record now.
Now they're part of the court records, yes. And that, those cases have even developed further because subsequently there was the raid on Rekatlolo's office. So I left on a Friday, that was my last day. Mind you, government is supposed to notify you 2 or 3 months before your contract expires whether they're going to renew it or not. I received my letter, I think a month after I had left office. But I left office on a Friday. Rekatlolo was suspended on a Tuesday. Baretsi was also suspended on a Tuesday. Subsequently, Red German was transferred. Most of my team have been transferred out of my unit. But I think what the issue, Lawrence, is the DCEC is a valuable institution. Even the DIS is a valuable institution when used properly. When they are there to serve the public good. The moment they become infiltrated by a political agenda, then they stop serving the purpose that that they are designed to serve. Rekatlolo and I know each other from a long time back, from the early 90s when I was a student. But once I graduated, I used to do a lot of training for police officers, including DCEC officers, on legal issues. I used to teach at Otse, and we were Bayford, Unoda, and myself were some of the first, I think, to teach in the DCEC auditorium after the building had been completed. So he has always known me as he had always known me as a defense counsel. And when he joined the DCEC, he called me to his office and said, Salbany, how do you feel that now that you are working on the other side of law enforcement? And I said to him, you know, DG, it's, we're not on the other side. We've always been part and parcel of the same coin. Defense and investigating, prosecuting, they are part of the justice system. They are there to ascertain the truth. Defense has certain latitude that a prosecutor doesn't have, but the fact is that it's the truth that you're seeking to establish. But most importantly is that justice prevails. So it's not really opposite sides. We have not been in conflict, but we complement each other.
It doesn't mean that when you are prosecuting, you have to be unjust.
Exactly.
To whoever you are investigating.
Exactly.
And the point in reference, we've seen also the state losing quite a lot of cases in court. In Khama, we have seen so many cases that he won against the state because maybe where you are talking about justice and the process to arrive at it.
You see, Lawrence,
could have been miscarriage.
If prosecutions are based on misguided principles and not on evidence, then the state is going to, ultimately it's going to lose. Because the evidence will speak for itself. The butterfly case is an example. It has gone to court. It was severely castigated. The raid on Katlolo's office, the Court of Appeal came out and said that the conduct of the organization conducting the raid, it was the DIS, was criminal. That's a heavy, very heavy statement to make of an intelligence agency or a fellow law enforcement agency. And what we need to keep in mind is that there is this global authority, the Financial Action Task Force, that oversees the conduct of our individual countries and the individual law enforcement agencies within those countries. And they want those agencies to cooperate and work together. And what we have persistently shown, FATF, is that our interagency cooperation is not working. And beyond that, we see government intervening in different ways. And this is my opinion, it's not necessarily shared by others, but you had the Fusion Agency, for example, which was an independent agency that deals with anti-terrorism and is supposed to be a data gathering point for all intelligence within the Botswana Police, BERS, DCEC, DIS, etc. It's all contained in the Anti-Terrorism Act. The fusion agencies were created as a result of the 9/11 attacks in the US because the various law enforcement agencies hadn't shared information in the US, and that's what led to the attack on the Twin Towers. So its purpose is to be separate from the intelligence gathering, yes. and yet fall within them. But it is a very powerful institution. And it is the institution that reports to the United Nations potential terrorism activity, threats activity. And there are processes that once a person is listed as a domestic terrorist, they need to be listed with the United Nations. When you have an arms cache at your disposal, and you then say that that arm cache contains weapons of war. When you say that a person has stolen 100 billion, and that is going to trigger domestic terrorism, when you say that a person who on arrest has said that he's going to topple government and that is a threat to government, then there are processes that are automatically triggered where all this is contained in law. I'm not trying to make reference to a specific case. It's contained in law. Then there are processes that are triggered by the Fusion Agency, and that is supposed to report to the United Nations. All these events happened in Botswana, and yet they were never triggered. No reports
to the international community. That's why we were grey listed as well.
That's why we continue to be grey listed, and that's why we almost didn't get out of the grey listing, because we were severely rebuked during the assessment about these interagencies cooperation. But then what we do is that because Fusion has so much power and is such a vital cog in the legal mechanism, we then take Fusion away from being independent, and we brought it under the control of the DIS, defeating the very objective of creating the Fusion.
Yes.
Yeah. This is my view now. This is my personal opinion. And why that was done was so that we can control the narrative within the country and externally. What we do in the country, within the borders of Botswana, is not necessarily what we're going to report to the international community. Because if we report to the international community, we will be susceptible to much greater scrutiny than what we would be susceptible to within the country. Within the country, it's easy to control the media. You control the narrative. What is leaked to the media, the state media. You can push an agenda within your jurisdiction. And when I say control the media, Lawrence, I'm speaking liberally. I don't mean the literal control. But having been in the media, you know that information is leaked because it serves a particular agenda, for example.
Yes.
Not always, but it can be.
Well, most of the times. And when you speak about that, I was going to bring into a line of conversation a press release that I saw earlier on today by the directorate, by the DIS, rebuking those who leak information, and basically trying to say under the ISS Act, basically some of these things, I would say secretive by nature. They are part of national security, so leaking them, a point in case they highlighted some of their bases, where they are or where they have bought cells for whatever purpose and functions they do, exposes their organization's operations and all that kind of stuff, with the caution that whoever is dealing with maybe publicizing that information has to be careful about that. So I don't know, I'm just trying to bring the other side of the coin towards what you say. So what do you make of it in a responsible environment? Because it's another thing also to be able to understand and underline what, I'll play the devil's advocate here, what your responsibilities are also as a journalist, I would say as a media person, to your nation and the protection of all of that national interest, and what you can write and not write. There are guidelines. So I'm not sure whether this conversation in our borders had been had enough, because ever since the establishment of state secret agencies, they have been mad with a lot of shadowy and murky things. But there is also the other side of justification that we should have a process on how we leak out information. So as a journalist, then how do you find a balance?
Well, I think one of the fundamental problems that that journalists have had in Botswana is the lack of access to information. The Freedom of Information Act, it's non-existent. So journalists in Botswana rely heavily on leaked information.
Which is illegal.
And then you face a government that has been increasingly secretive. So you get a leak saying Salbany has received a bribe of 200 million, and it's in this form, that form, that form. You write to government, and government says, oh, rubbish. They don't say anything else. And you've got no way, because you don't have a way to access bank accounts, you don't have a way to access personal records on property, etc., etc. So it's always been very easy for government to deny and claim fake news. We are now dealing with a government that has said that transparency is going to underpin their governance. And I don't think that rebuttals, blatant rebuttals, serve any purpose. If a newspaper says that Salbany owns X farm, Y farm, D farm, and he owns them in company A, B, C, then a government rebuttal shouldn't be, no, he doesn't. And you are exposing this to, you are exposing the agency to public scrutiny. The government rebuttal should be, here is the title deed of the farm that you are referring to. Here are the shareholders of the companies you are referring to. Go and inspect them yourself. It is not owned by Salbany. He's not a shareholder in any of these companies. If you're going to talk about transparency, that is transparency. To say that you regret the nature of the leaks and that they are disruptive and they are defamatory and they're whatever, that's not even a rebuttal. And that's what we have gotten used to. What is wrong when I say company ABCD owns XYZ, and coming out and saying this is incorrect because here are the companies that you have listed. Here is what the property that they own. That is a genuine rebuttal. We have gotten too used to government attacking the media when it has exposed something.
We have seen situations where the former Director General of the Intelligence, Isaac Kgosi, has had some of charges that he was facing scrapped out by the courts. Some of the issues were that these were part and parcel of operational objectives that the institution needed to achieve. So they have to operate in such a way, covert operations and murky ways and all the likes, where I think for some instances, let's just say they were able to prove that it was not for personal purposes, but there was this and process. Or we've seen it in other countries. I'm trying to maybe find a way or maybe a balance of caution there, that the nature of intelligence and secretive operations often go against the grain of the natural principle that we know?
Okay, I think there are two issues there. The first is if there are allegations of corruption. Corruption is a national security concern. If your intelligence agency is involved in allegations of corruption, you can't hide behind national security to obscure issues of corruption. The corruption allegations must trump the issues of national security. You will recall during the Vietnam War there was the Pentagon Papers.
Yes.
The leakage of American involvement into Lagos, and basically those were national security issues. And the newspaper had to do, it was the Washington Post, had to debate whether to publish those documents.
Or redact and whatever,
Exactly.
yes.
And what they did was that they actually communicated with the CIA and FBI as to what could be published without interference of national security.
Yes.
Okay, there were a lot of other issues involved. But those sort of principles have remained within the media.
Yes.
Is that you then draw a balancing act. And we must differentiate between organizational, structural security operations and individual abuses of power. And this applies to any office of government. Whether it is police, DCEC, DIS, BDF.
Your organizations, especially in the past immediate regime, were more polarized than we had ever seen, because of it's the conflict between former President Ian Khama and former President Masisi and all the politics that were prevailing. It also created an environment where there is a lot of mistrust, as you mentioned earlier on, and internal factions within all these agencies, which often we have seen led to some of these establishments to behave in a manner that is not normal.
Earlier we spoke about civil servants losing their way and becoming politicized. And what happened between the DCEC, DIS, Botswana Police, BERS, FIA, was largely as a result, DPP, AG's chambers, was largely as a result of civil servants forgetting the nature of their function. So I think the issue that needed to be addressed was that the political disputes cascaded down into law enforcement. And I would like to believe that for the most part, the DCEC, at least until the very end, tried to stay out of those disputes. Matambo had put his foot down, Rekatlolo put his foot down and said, if you want to proceed with these matters, bring us evidence. We will analyze the evidence and either carry on with the investigations or we will scrap the investigations. But the pushback was extreme.
So it's quite interesting. Look, I do believe that as we go along, we'll be having others also, hopefully people from the intelligence community will join me also to say their side of the story. Like the Chido case, every other party believes that the other party is on the wrong and not behaving accordingly. So it's quite an interesting, and I think now with the change of government, it will also be quite interesting to see where it goes. I mean, someone was telling me that, for example, the contract of the Directorate General of the DIS has been increased by an additional 2 years. I don't know. I haven't been able to verify it, but it will be quite interesting to have him come and share with us his perspectives while he's still there, because I feel like sometimes we are just walloping the guy, but we've never had an opportunity also to pose the questions onto what type of processes and what type of mindset were they thinking when they maneuver around other certain things. This whole wealth of knowledge comes from the background of you holding an LLB. Two things, you were exiled in South Africa, and then at some point you found yourself exiled in South Africa with next to the men who PI'd you. I'm also exiled in South Africa.
We never met.
So I don't know how that must have made you feel, because the same medicine was being dealt with that. I'm sure it must have not been a nice thing to be away from your country for more than 4 years. You have done more, 8 or so, and all the likes. That issue, I just want to know how you felt when all of these things were ongoing. Secondly, your LLB, you were unable to practice or get employment in South Africa for all these years. Why is that so when Botswana recognizes the South African legal, what do you mean, the South African
law degree
bachelor's?
Well, first let me address the last issue. We've always assumed that there's reciprocity between South Africa and Botswana insofar as the law degrees are concerned. And it is on that basis that people who hold a South African law degree then come and practice here. Government even sends students from here to go and study in South Africa, and then they come back and they are admitted into practice. On the assumption that there is this reciprocity, because the law requires that there's reciprocity between the two countries. We regularly admit advocates from South Africa, etc. When I had to leave Botswana and I wanted to set up in South Africa, I approached the Law Society, and I was shocked. The Transvaal Law Society, or the Gauteng Law Society. And I was shocked to learn that, in fact, they don't recognize the UB law degree. So for some years, I've been trying to lobby government this side to get the University of Botswana added to the schedule of recognized law degrees in South Africa. And it hasn't worked. I was reading recently in the parliamentary papers that Re Arafat Khan has raised this issue as a concern. In Parliament.
Yes.
So I'm hoping that the Minister of Justice will provide an answer in this respect.
But
so
I find it strange that there's no reciprocity.
It's very strange. And when I engage both sides, where I engage the Permanent Secretary for Justice here, and I engaged the counterpart in South Africa, it seems that there's just been an omission in adding Botswana to the schedule. But that requires it requires a diplomatic intervention.
Ian Dan is a lawyer. He's been in South Africa as an ambassador. Haven't you had an opportunity while you were there just to...
Unfortunately, when Yandani moved to South Africa, we hadn't been able to meet. I had his number from Botswana, and we just hadn't had a chance to meet. But Mema Monacheng Sanji, who was Executive Secretary of the Law Society, is also an ambassador in South Africa, and we had spoken about it. So it is something that just, unfortunately, it takes time. But I'm hoping that at least now it will be resolved relatively quickly.
Well, our president is also a lawyer, so what are the impacts of having this thing? For you, I know the direct impacts you are unable to practice, more relatively so, because what is your status in South Africa?
No, I'm a South African citizen.
Yes, you're a South African citizen, but because you haven't lived there for almost your entire life and whatnot.
No, I hadn't lived in South Africa since I was 9. So South Africa is foreign to me. It might be my country of birth, but...
Remember, you're not exiled. You're actually banished to no man's land, where you don't even know anyone. At least some are better when they are exiled. They are sent back to home country, but... You're in an island.
Botswana has been my home. For all my formative years, Botswana has been my home. My friends, my associates, my family. Damn, Lawrence, I've got a big family in Botswana. Aside from my literal family, my 5 children, I've got friends who are brothers to me. Sisters to me.
But these kids, your kids are Botswana, really.
They are.
And how do you engage with them when all of this stuff keeps being happening to you and being done to you, and you are unable to be here for them?
It's difficult, and it has caused them trauma. Especially my 10-year-old. He has really struggled. Developed speech impediments. He has struggled. He has been out of school because I haven't been able to provide for the family the way I wanted to provide. So it's been a struggle. And a friend of mine made a social media post about not being able to work. She's a teacher. Who was involved in the 2011 strikes and has been blacklisted since then. And I was telling her there's nothing more dehumanizing. I'm sure there are a lot more things, but it feels extremely dehumanizing not to be able to work, not to be able to provide.
And the irony of it, all of this, because you are defending humans' rights.
Yes, unfortunately.
So I'm aware that you have been, when the new government came in, you and the president, Duma Boko, you come from far, really, from him being your lecturer to you representing him on other cases and him representing you on other cases, and you working together side by side in the corridors of courts. And generally, I know that Bayford and Associates and all of that will often be involved in the litigation or on court procedures to do with their umbrella, the UDC and all the likes. What has been your communication maybe now that some of us know that you are closer to the men?
Oh, we haven't had much of a... we haven't had a rapporteur. He's been extremely busy. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to...
but for me, who are these guys? Julius Malema, all of these people, their PI was lifted just
Lawrence,
there and there. And
those are different, and I'm not in the same category as. No, I'm not in the same category as those. It'll come.
Because look, I don't know, man. My expectation is that look, we've seen this before, and when Masisi came immediately into office in less than 2 or so months, there was pressure or whatever, and he ended up lifting it. I'm hoping that you are having the same dialogue.
Oh no! I mean, I wasn't PI'd now, so.
Yes.
So I've been back. I came back, I think, 2 days, the day after elections were announced, the results were announced. I got invited to the inauguration by the UDC.
And you cried a lot. Yeah.
Oh, I cried. I mean, poor Mike, you know, he had to console me. You had to console me. It was good. It's... I mean, you know, there's people like Mike Keokopa who I've known for the better part of 30 years. You know, they were consoling. They were good. It's difficult to explain. When you've been removed from everything that's important to you, to then come back, to be able to see your children every day, your friends.
Yeah, man.
It's
Sorry
good to be
about
back.
that.
Nah,
Sorry about that. But I guess I understand how others are also feeling when they are now able to come back. But if I were to ask you one last question before we go on a break, would you? I mean, we have to ask the president to intervene in some of these things and correct where wrong has been done. Would you find it in yourself to forgive those who did this to you?
Forgive? Yeah. There's nothing to forgive. It's just one of those things in life. People make choices, Lawrence.
Basically, you just want your life back and be there for the kids and be able to provide for them.
Yeah. And I feel I've got something to contribute to the country. I still feel I've got something to contribute to the country. It's a place I love. It's my home. Legally, it's not my home, but in every sense, it's my home. So I'm back. I'm back for all intents and purposes. My 90 days run out soon, but I have made overtures, so I'm hoping at immigration. So I'm hoping at least I can get my permit sorted. I had applied for citizenship in 2005. I'm hoping that will be resolved because I never received an answer from that. But yeah.
Yeah, man, it's strange. We are just coming from the past where immigration was so weaponized against a lot of people, you know.
And the funny thing is, you then find out how citizenship was being sold left, right, and center.
Of course. I get where you are going. Oh, get in trouble.
Yeah, we will get in trouble.
Of course, everybody knows. But yeah, my man, I think ultimately at the end of the day, maybe a last word on Donald Trump before we can wrap up our conversation.
Geez, I've been PI'd from Botswana. I don't need to be brandished as a terrorist by the United States. I've got nothing kind to say about Donald Trump, nor his approach to democracy. But but who am I to comment? I think we are heading for a time of extreme conservatism. Fascism is coming back.
Because what's worrying me the most, if I may interject, is the recent reforms. For example, withdrawing from the World Health Organization and also putting a ban on the provision of HIV/AIDS medication to poor countries. That was just extreme.
And Lawrence, his direct interference with the judiciary, with the prosecutorial powers. Let me tell you, if any African state were to do what Donald Trump was doing, that African state would be condemned as undemocratic, as interfering with a free and independent judiciary. His attacks on the media, any African country that did the same, they would be roundly condemned by the world. But because we are in Africa, we can't do the things that he does. And because he's in America, and it is America, it is, oh, this is part of the democratic process. The only thing that I think is something that needs to be seriously considered, and it has never been considered because it's the first time that happened, it has happened in the 58 years of Botswana's history, is that there needs to be a transitional period between governments. Because of automatic succession, there has just been a flow from one president to another president because they have just assumed the office. But we see the hurdle now when there's a fresh presidency coming in.
Yes, yes.
And you would like to see a new president coming in, especially where there's such a marked difference between BDP and UDC politics, for example, where the new president would be able to say, in 3 months, I'm changing this PS, that PS, this position, that position, and be able to do that in a transitional period. I think the current government is stuck with an ideology of the previous administration.
Which they need to dismantle and build their own.
And ideologies are difficult
to dismantle,
at the same
time, because they are part of a system.
Exactly.
50, 60-year culture.
If you've got a culture where civil servants believed it was acceptable to raid newspapers, believed it was acceptable to declare somebody a prohibited immigrant because of views that they expressed, whether it was myself or Professor Good and many others.
How weaponize the BURS in terms of the current president, Boko?
Exactly. How then do you change those very people? You change their philosophy, their ideology, their concepts of human rights. You are not going to change them, and the best way to deal with it would be to remove and replace. And you'd want to do that in a dignified manner, where somebody has committed crimes or whatever. That's fine. You can suspend them and remove them. But others, you want to maintain their dignity and their respect, which is what Reboko has also indicated. But in order to do that in a manner in which it won't be disruptive to government, you need that transitional period. So that is one of the issues that needs to be considered during a constitutional review. And there's nothing wrong with having elections in October and the new president assumes office in January, which is pretty much what the US does. We follow a more English model, but you can still have a transitional period so that there's an easy flow.
Okay. That's quite interesting. Yeah, my man, I think we have engaged on quite a lot and a mouthful for one sitting. I know we have a lot that we can talk about. We will once in a while come and share and engage on specific subject matters that Botswana definitely will be suggesting for us to come and engage on, because the education in this exercise can never be exhaustive. I was joined by Joao Carlos, a big human rights lawyer, as we have heard. He had a lot to contribute to this country. I don't have, I'm just, you know, when I was listening to his story, I'm just walking out of here with my mind like, is this the kind of society that we really want to be? I think when he started this and highlighting some of the human rights cases that he had to champion, he asked the question that, is this the type of society that we want to be or live for our children? Maybe I'll leave this with you and allow you time to reflect as we move along into the Second Republic and build that which we want to find which we want our children to find and live in the future. Thank you for staying tuned. This is the Punchline Podcast. I'm Lawrence Seretse. Subscribe, share, comment. Please mind your language for Baba who have dirty mouths. All right, stay tuned.